speeches about that. He also turned against the Vietnam War very strongly as an aggressive, murderous war. Okay, that part of his life is, sort of marginalized. In fact, he was bitterly criticized for it. As long as he was talking about racist sheriffs in Alabama, Northern liberals could cheer. When he started talking about what's happening here, no, don't cheer.
And Professor Chomsky, you already hinted at some of the tensions now around the Muslim community, because they, as it were, at the end of this cycle of beginning to be assimilated into the American mainstream system. And there are many heartbreaking stories as we travel. We meet kids who are 10 years old, who've known nothing but being abused and accused of being a terrorist in class here. Yeah, American kids born here. We met one in St. Louis, one in Chicago, one in a mosque in New York. We were in Little Pakistan in Brooklyn in New York, and we were told that something like 40 to 50% of the Pakistani population disappeared. So many were sent back, many were deported, many just ran away, but that is a huge number, and it's traumatized the community. So what would you say now, as one of the great American icons and figures, which are the steps we need to be taking as humanists to bring better understanding between mainstream Americans and the Muslim community?
I mean, the only advice is the simple virtues, which everyone knows. Education, organizing, interactions, interfaith groups, others, which just try to overcome the racism, the fears, the hostilities, and so on. And again, the fears are real. 9/11 happened, okay? And in a very frightened country, which is always looking for somebody who's out to destroy us, it traumatized people. You read interviews with American soldiers going to Iraq. Why are you going? Well, we're going to get even. They did it to us, we're going to do it to them. Who's them? Well, that's some, ragheads. I mean, Arabs, Muslims, anybody. Sometimes it's ludicrous. I mean, take, say, Iran. I'll tell you about MIT, the peak of culture. In the 1970s, the administration at MIT made a deal with the Shah, secret. But of course it leaked, like everything leaks. So it was a deal with the Shah to effectively sell the nuclear engineering department to the Shah to develop Iranian nuclear energy and probably nuclear weapons. It was strongly supported by Washington. Kissinger, Cheney, Rumsfeld, Wolfowitz all thought it was wonderful because the Shah was our ally. In fact, the Iranian programs today, half of them probably run by MIT graduates. Well, this leaked. It leaked. The students were outraged. Big student protest, student referendum, like 80% opposed and so on. And it finally got to the point where they just had to call a faculty meeting. Usually nobody goes to faculty meetings because they're too boring, but this time everybody came, big auditorium, whole faculty there. I had a big debate about should we do this. There were maybe 10 people, of whom I was one, who spoke up in opposition, but everybody was in favor of it and voted it through, which is itself kind of interesting because the faculty are the students of yesterday, but the institutional shift changed their attitudes. So the students are opposed, the faculty's in favor. Well, as I was walking out of the meeting, I happened to be walking out together with the Dean of Engineering, who was one of the major spokesmen for the deal. And he was giving eloquent speeches about how he'd visited Iran over and over. He was an expert in Persian poetry and loved Iranian culture. You can imagine. As we were walking out, he turned to me and he said, I don't understand your position. I thought you were pro-Arab. How come you're against this? He didn't know that Iran wasn't an Arab country. I mean, that's the level of understanding you're dealing with. And I'm not talking to, the guy who pumps gas. So yes, it's like calling everyone from Eastern Europe Huns. Calling everyone from Southern Europe Wops. Believing the Jews are conquering, right now on the internet, you find conspiracy theories about how everything terrible that's happening to us is being done by the Rothschilds. Google Rothschild on the internet. I mean, I get a lot of this stuff because those Jews, they own everything. They run the country. There's, I mean, they're influential, but the mythology about Jews running the country is incredible.
This is the anti-Semitism, which is a kind of undercurrent.
It's an undercurrent, and it's not. I don't know if where'd you grow up?
In Boston?
Yeah, well, I don't know if I experienced it as a kid.
Oh, a lot of anti-Semitism.
I experienced it at Harvard. Harvard has changed now, but in the early 1950s when I was there, you could cut the anti-Semitism with a knife. There were virtually no Jewish faculty. The Jewish students, like me, were kind of out of everything. There's a whole life going on that we didn't know about. It changed, but it was very real.
And Paul Samuelson got his PhD at Harvard, but he came here because Jewish professors weren't given tenure at Harvard. So
one of the reasons MIT is a great university is because Jews couldn't get jobs at Harvard. So they came down to the engineering school down the street, which didn't have the same class bias. This is not all deep in the past, and it's been true of, as I say, the Irish a century ago were. Actually, I mean, they were doing, a lot of, especially gynecology, fields like that, which were developed a lot in Boston. I mean, one of the reasons that it advanced was because they were using black and Irish women as subjects, doing horrifying experiments, because it was considered normal.
Professor Chomsky, we are also on this journey. We are going to travel. I've taken a sabbatical, and these young assistants of mine are traveling with me throughout the United States. We have a blog. It's called journeyintoamerica.wordpress.com. Word. So journeyintoamerica.wordpress.com. And we've got some really interesting stories. In fact, Craig and Frankie have a story which was picked up by CNN yesterday about the Somali workers in Grand Island, the meatpacking plant. So we're hoping to put your interview, some of it, on this blog.
Let's talk about Somali workers.
Yeah,
it's a very interesting and important story. Somalia has had a hideous history, time to go through it, but the U.S. has had a big role in it. However, just coming to the recent period, for the first time in decades, Somalia had a government that was actually working. I don't like it. Ugly government, Islamic extremists. It's these so-called Islamic courts. But the government was working. It was peaceful, it was calm. People were beginning to get their lives together. The United States didn't like it. The United States rammed through a Security Council resolution in 1725, which declared that all governments must keep their hands out of Somalia, no intervention in Somalia. There was a government recognized by the West. It held one tiny little corner of Somalia, barely holding on because of Ethiopian support. Immediately after passing this resolution, the United States backed an Ethiopian invasion, which entered Somalia, overcame the Islamic courts, turned the country into turmoil and disaster, sharply increased violence and terrorism. What they call the Somali pirates are mostly probably fishermen who can't survive. I mean, it recreated a complete disaster. Now that's largely the U.S. government is largely responsible for that, for its support. The Ethiopians couldn't have invaded without U.S. support, and of course, when they invaded, it led to an uprising. So that's Somalia.
And we have that in the book, Professor Chomsky, and we are, of course, very concerned with what's happening in Pakistan, because now with these excursions, today again you've heard a drone has killed people in Waziristan, in the tribal areas, and this is, of course, escalating a crisis in Pakistan, which is, it's a very dangerous situation.
My friend,
Oh, I know very well, yes.
Well, he had an article in Dawn, maybe 6 or 8 months ago, in which he described a drone attack on a madrasa, which he said killed 80 to 85 students. It was never reported here. But And he made the obvious point. He said, okay, maybe you were aiming at some terrorist, maybe he was there, maybe he wasn't there. But you kill 80 to 85 students, apart from the fact that it's a war crime. What do you think the effect is on the population? I mean, it doesn't take a genius to figure it out. Actually, if you want something, you know, kind of like sick irony, there was a story in the New York Times, you can probably Google it, which about the men, the Air Force personnel who run the drones. They're sitting somewhere in Southern California or something, and and they're, you know, at their computers doing all this stuff, and it was talking about the difficulties they have. Sort of a human interest story. They're suffering all kind of traumas. They need psychiatric care and so on.
People are manning this.
They're manning the computers. Why? Because when a pilot flies over someplace and drops a bomb, say John McCain, flying over Hanoi, he didn't see what happens. You drop your bomb and you go away. But the drones circle around, and they have high-tech photographic equipment, so you can see the pieces of children flying through the air and so on. And this is very traumatic for the men in Southern California, so they need psychiatric treatment. I mean, you have to ask yourself, you know, what's wrong with the country that an article like that can appear without people, you know, just rioting in fury?
Well, Professor Chomsky, thank you so much. You've been very generous with your time and your ideas. We're going to, of course, use them and incorporate them in our own study. And I hope you have time to have a look at this. We have to. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Professor Chomsky.
That was excellent. Thank you very much. You're okay.
Thanks. Did you go through the whole anti-Semitic business when you were growing up?
Oh, yeah,
Where
the
you
Irish
lived?
kids in Roxbury.
Roxbury.
The Irish kids were going to beat us up all the time.
Same with me, Irish kids.
I don't care.
In fact, I grew up with a visceral fear of Catholics, you know, which I didn't get over till I was a grown up.
Yeah, I went to Hebrew school. And,
What, sorry?
I grew up with a visceral fear of Catholics
Wow.
because we were the only Jewish family in an Irish and German Catholic neighborhood. It was the 30s. The Irish were pro-Nazi because they were English. The Germans were pro-Nazi because they were Germans. I was the, you know, these are boys in the street. It's not as bad as today. Like, you know, you don't get shot, you know, you don't get knifed. But
That's right, they beat you
the
up.
level of violence was
Didn't have
much
guns.
less. But nevertheless, it was frightening, you know, and literally it was until I was an adult. I mean, I sort of knew it's ridiculous, but I just had this visceral fear of Catholics. They're going to come after you.
Thank you so much, Professor.
and it didn't.